Welcome to Macon Memories. I'm Lynda Wright at Randolph-Macon College. Today is May the 4th, 2019, and I'm here with Alan Rashkind, chairman of the college's Board of Trustees. So, Mr. Rashkind, I was just wondering if you could tell us how you happened to come to Randolph-Macon and your...
High school student in Norfolk. My debate partner was Tom Forehand. His father was Vernon Forehand, and he wanted nothing more than for his son to go to Randolph-Macon. I guess you can tell from the story that his son did not go to Randolph-Macon, instead went to everything but enroll me, including driving me up here to meet with the admissions officer and took me to meet with a trustee. I did ultimately enroll as a result of solely his influence. I didn't even know Randolph-Macon existed. I didn't know where the railroad tracks essentially ran through the campus. I thought he was making that up. Came up here and found out that he wasn't making that up. First day I was here because I loved the people who were here. And I continued to grow to love the people here. And I had a wonderful experience here. And some of that experience actually included education. And I had very good professors here. Some of whom would not say I was the best student, but others of whom eventually caused me to be the best student. And I could go on and name all sorts of wonderful professors like Dick Wood and Burnell Pannell, who I've had. I had so many, but two who stand out are Ira Andrews and Howard Davis. And Howard, from the standpoint of education, was just instrumental in my education. He was my advisor. I wrote a senior project under him. He taught me how to do legal research. By the time I got to law school, I was at least a year and a half ahead of my peers. And I graduated in '69, and that was a time when anybody who wasn't going to graduate school was getting drafted, so everybody who could was going to graduate school. We had fierce competition for admission to UVA Law School, and I was ahead of my Ivy League peers, anybody, because I knew constitutional law principles that they didn't know yet, and I knew how to do legal research that they didn't know how to do yet. And I learned that all here through Howard Davis. And Howard didn't do it for me, but he challenged me to do it. Ira, on the other hand, I took his Bible class and enjoyed it immensely. But the thing about Ira was that he taught leadership skills because he was the dean of students. It was then the dean of men. But he was a fantastic mentor for me and many of my other classmates. I served as president of my fraternity, which was AE Pi, and then while doing that, I served as president of the Council of Fraternity Presidents. And during that period of time, Ira tried to give as much fraternity discipline as he could to the student leaders, the fraternity presidents. And so we worked with him, and he was the ultimate authority, and sometimes we didn't agree, but Ira was wonderful in terms of allowing people to disagree, and he did not take umbrage at the fact that you didn't accept his opinions, and he didn't take umbrage that you didn't accept his opinions. And it was a wonderful lesson along with Ira's inclusiveness. And I can think of a couple instances that I'm not going to talk about here where Ira would pull a student aside or a fraternity aside by virtue of just saying to them something like, do you really think what you're doing is something you ought to be doing? Rather than scolding you, he was telling you, you can do better, and he encouraged you to do it. What a wonderful lesson that was.
Made it a teachable moment, yeah.
Exactly, and I can tick off several of those moments, but I just assume that they remain anonymously. But his lessons were enduring, and I actually today is my last day as board chair. And when I stepped down, I said one of the proudest moments I had was when Ira sent me a note congratulating me on being elected as board chair. And one of my other proud moments was being able to dedicate Andrews Hall because he is someone who is dedicated to this college. Now, I don't know if that's what you wanted to hear, but that's my story. That's how I came here. And I guess I became involved as a student because I was encouraged to do the best I could while I was here. And I like the people that I found here, and I still do like the people I found here.
I don't think there's been an interview I've done that hasn't mentioned Ira Andrews, so that's just wonderful. It just really, adds to his legacy. So.
The only way you will have an interview without someone mentioning Ira Andrews is if they were unfortunate enough to have post-dated his career here, and you won't be seeing those folks for a while.
Right. Well, thank you for that. That is a wonderful story about your coming here and your experience. You were here. You graduated class in 1969, so you were here when the college desegregated,
That's
when Hap
correct.
Payne became the first African American
That's
student.
correct.
And I interviewed him on a Board of Trustee weekend as well after a meeting just like today. But I wondered if you had any reflections on that at the time when he came, or 2 years ago we were able to celebrate, the desegregation of the college and its diversity across the entire year.
Well, first of all, I have to admit that I didn't know Hap very well when he was here, and he was only here for a short period of time when I was here.
Right.
I knew of Hap, and I knew of the effort of the school to integrate, and my fraternity was fully supportive of that, and we even tried to admit African American students as our fraternity brothers, but there were few who were here, and fewer still who were foolish enough to join a fraternity. But we were very much in favor of that, and I don't think there's anybody now who doesn't recognize how an important step that was for the college. I consider there have been several momentous occasions. I think the most momentous was when the college moved from Boynton to Ashland. I would say the second was when the college decided to go co-ed, and I think the decision to desegregate or to integrate was an important decision, critical to the college's survival.
Right.
And I've got to serve on the board with Hap for years and years and years, and we have an enduring friendship now that unfortunately I didn't have then. I barely knew him. I pretty much knew who he was.
You were, right. Well, thank you for that. Well, you were the first person in your family to come to Randolph-Macon, but not the last. And I wonder if you wanted to talk a little bit about your family's involvement with the college over the years.
I'd be glad to. As you know, I was the first. My brother and I, we joked. My brother's less than 2 years younger than I am, and we joked that we only had one fight growing up. It ended when I went away to college. So when he was considering college, I was stunned when he announced at the dinner table one night that he was coming to Randolph-Macon. And I said, "Why did you do that?" And he said, "Because the admissions officer, Bill Cox, assured me that I could come to Randolph-Macon and never see you for 2 years we overlapped." And you're laughing because that obviously was not true. Now, whether or not Bill Cox actually told my brother that, or my brother thought he heard that, we'll now never know. But Mike came here. We got along fine while he was here, and I think he was helped to have his older brother here. So fast forward, Ira Andrews had the idea, well, I got two Rashkinds here, and I want to start this Parents Advisory Council, so what if I get this Julian Rashkind character to be on the Parents Advisory Council? And I think my father was on the first such council and became one of the early presidents. Now, we joke about the origin of the Rashkind Family Foundation gift to the what became the Rashkind Faculty Grants Program. I've always maintained that my father and mother were convinced that the faculty here were magicians because they took their two sons who had not distinguished themselves with scholarship in high school and made them somewhat decent graduates who at least appeared to be able to read, write, and speak clearly. And as a result of believing that the faculty were magicians, my parents endowed the Rashkind Family Grant Program in order to encourage continued faculty magicians who might do the same for future generations. And through the years, my father eventually became on the board, and then later I became on the board, and we actually got to serve at the same time for a period of time. Nice. I don't know how inviting this story is to everybody, but I was elected to the to be president of the Society of Alumni, and that allowed me to be on the board for 2 years with Dad. Then I rotated out of that position, so I was off the board for 2 years, from 1989 to 91. In 1991, Liddell Payne called me and asked me if I'd like to come back on the board full time rather than just as an ex officio member. And of course I said yes, but as soon as I hung up the phone from Liddell, I called the chair of the nominating committee on the board, and I didn't have to look up his number because it was my father. And I said, Dad, don't you think there's something wrong about having me elected to come back to the board when you're the chair of the nominating committee? And my father said, don't worry, Alan, I voted against you. And then I served on the board for a number of years with him, and we very much enjoyed our interest in Randolph-Macon, and he took his trusteeship very seriously. As you probably heard last night, he read the Yellow Book thoroughly, and that was no exaggeration. Well, you know I have two sons, and one of them graduated here, and that's Graham. Graham was born in 1974, and shortly after he was born, and within days, I got a letter on Randolph-Macon stationery admitting him to the class of 1996. And I opened the letter and I said, they can't do this. This is wrong. They don't know anything about. And then I looked at the signature at the bottom of the letter, and it was my father's signature. He had written that letter on stationery that he had from his days on the advisory committee. But in fact, Graham did wind up coming here after telling me as a teenager he would never come here, and he came here. He met the best friends he's ever had, and he met his wife here. And so we've got that Randolph-Macon couple here. So we've got myself, my brother, my son, my daughter-in-law, and who knows, we hope we'll have some other family members come someday as well.
Right.
But if not, the family connection will always be there, because it's a wonderful thing to be able to support a teaching faculty with the teaching excellence that this faculty has, and we've been able to do that through the Rashkind Family Foundation.
Well, I just want to take this opportunity to thank you for that, you and your family. And I think it's really wonderful that your father and your family chose to, in their generosity, to support the faculty. It would have been easy for him, not having come here, to had put it towards scholarship or more student, directly a student focused rather than a faculty, and which is obviously student focused as well. But I think it was very insightful and supportive, and as we just heard last night, so many faculty have been able to continue their research and take advantage of opportunities they wouldn't have been able to do without it.
And Tom Pizer made fun of some of the titles of the works that have been produced as a result of those grants. And many of the faculty members are kind enough, first they would send it to my parents, now they send it to me as well, send me the finished product. And I have a shelf on my bookcase that has what I'll have to say are some obscure titles, most of which I haven't read, although I usually look at the subject so that when I next see the faculty member, I can talk intelligently about, for instance, Shakespeare in Wales and things like that. That's not the fishing whales, that's the country whales. But I take great pride in the fact that the family has supported research that's important to the faculty. And going back to my father's vision, it wasn't just my father, though my father gets a lot of credit. My mother was very, very supportive of education, including education for women. She too was a college graduate. He was a graduate of Columbia School of Pharmacy. She was a graduate of Hunter College. And she very much believed in college education. And so it isn't surprising at all to me that their focus was on faculty because, and all jokes aside about magicians, because they understand that a college is only so good as its faculty is allowing its students to be. So that's not a surprise to me at all.
Well, thank you. I got my library degree from Columbia School of Library Service.
Did you? Well, the Columbia School of Pharmacy doesn't exist anymore, but my father was the secretary of his class, and he graduated at age 20.
Oh, wow. Wow, that's
Amazing.
impressive. Yeah.
Yeah.
The School of Library Service doesn't exist any longer at Columbia either.
Yeah.
But anyway, I do want to just say for the record that your father did receive an honorary degree from the college and was made an honorary alumnus of the Society of Alumni as well. And he received the Algernon Sidney Sullivan Award in 1990, and your mother received the Mary Mildred Sullivan Award. So I'm glad they were able to get the recognition when they were living.
Let me say that in my house, I have both of those awards. On the wall in my study at my house, I have my father's honorary degree. And the honorary degree was given to him, as you say, in 1996. The dedication, I guess you would call it, was read by Ira Andrews. The hood was put on my father by my brother Mike, class of 71, while I sat behind Graham, class of 96, who graduated that same day, so that I could put the hood on him. And one of the pictures that you might have seen last night is the four of us, my father, my brother, my son Graham, and I, at that graduation in 1996. And that's one of my favorite all-time memories of Randolph-Macon, is having the opportunity to share that with my family on that date. And we've got that glorious black and white picture. And when I say we've got it, I've got it in my home, I've got it in my office. My son has it, my brother has it, and there are probably a couple other copies floating around in some other places. And they aren't just sitting underneath the stack, they're framed or hung in all the appropriate places. We're very proud of that picture and what it represents.
Right, right. And, well, you should be. Well, after you graduated, you stayed involved at the college with the Society of Alumni, and you were involved, chairman of president, I think it's called, the Society of Alumni, and you were chair of your 25th class reunion. And you've already mentioned how you segued from that onto the Board of Trustees. I didn't know if there was anything else you wanted to say about working with alumni in the Tidewater area or anything.
I was president of the local Tidewater chapter, which the Tidewater chapter sort of comes and goes, but I would tell you another story about how I got to be the president of the Society of Alumni. It's got some similarities to how I became on the board. Tom Powers, who I'm guessing you never met, but you might have heard about. Tom Powers was a legendary alumnus, and Tom was very active in the Society of Alumni. And when I came on the Society of Alumni board, I can't remember if it was 1977. No, I know it was not 77. I was asked in 77. One of my law partners was killed in a plane crash, so I couldn't accept it. So Susan Donovan asked me either the next year or the year after that. So 78 or 79, I went on the Society of Alumni board. I was on the nominating committee, and there was one particular year where, because of resignations and illness and that sort of thing, we had to replace more than the usual number of people in the chairs. You'd have the secretary, treasurer, the vice president, and the president. And Tom Powers was running the committee meeting, and after a few options had proved not to be good, he asked Pat Hanback, that was Patricia Hanback, one of our early female graduates, and a Phi Beta Kappa graduate at that. He asked Pat and me to step out in the hall. And when we came back, we were invited back in, we were instructed that I was to be the new secretary-treasurer and that Pat was going to be the secretary-treasurer after me. And that was significant because that would put Pat in line to be the first woman president of the Society of Alumni. Well, upon learning that I had been so selected, the then President Liddell Payne came over to me and greeted me and shook my hand and congratulated me and said, Alan, they couldn't have found a better man for the job. And I told Liddell that sadly that was true. They couldn't find a better man, so they had drafted me, but that they had decided that they were no longer going to be limited to better men. They were going to start choosing women too, and that was in the line. And he got a good kick out of that, and enough so that I continued to tell the story. But Pat did follow me and did ultimately become not just the president of the Society of Alumni, but she later became a trustee in her own right, and she later became a trustee emeritus, and she was a valuable member of the community, as is just about everybody who's been through, the Society of Alumni chairs. So that's sort of how I kept involved, was through that. I can remember going to a Society of Alumni meeting, a couple of them, where in one I brought my son Doug, who was born in '78, and it was probably the early '80s. Doug was very small, and we had a meeting. We used to have those Society of Alumni meetings at homecoming luncheon, and so we had the little meeting, and they called out my name as being elected or reelected, I forget which was, and Doug turned to me and said, "Daddy, why'd they call your name?" And I explained to him. Yeah. And then we had another Society of Alumni luncheon, which coincided with Doug's October 14 lunch. I'm sorry, let me try again. It was his birthday. Oh. And so for lunch, the Society of Alumni lunch, he received his own birthday cake. Aww. Compliments of Susan Donovan. Yes. And he has never forgotten that, nor Susan Donovan for that, as a little boy getting his own birthday cake.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, then you came on the Board of Trustees, which you talked about how you came on during that time. I wondered if you wanted to talk about any of the, important changes you've seen on the board or initiatives from the board during your time. I know the campus has changed physically greatly, and we've had a big capital campaign. So, whatever you feel like you'd like to talk about.
Well, understanding your perspective, we've had 3 capital campaigns that I've been involved with. Okay. So we had the one which is there's a plaque over here right behind us on this wall, or at least there used to be, about that campaign. Was that Our Heritage, Our Future, or so, I forget the names of it. And then there was a second campaign, the goal for which was, I think the first goal was 15 million or 10 million. And then the next campaign, and I can't remember the names of the campaign, the next one was $45 million, and that was thought to be a stretch. And then, of course, we had the campaign goal this last time of $100 million, which was also deemed a stretch. And, of course, as you know, we raised $125 million. And each of those campaigns has resulted in significant improvements to the college. And I'm not just talking about physical improvements, but I'm talking about improvements in the overall offerings of the college. And the landscape has changed, although I am very careful to point out that the one thing that hasn't changed is the excellence of the teaching faculty. And I think that's the bedrock of our institution and what we will survive on. And we will survive, but what will survive is because we're providing high quality education through professionals who teach and who love to teach. And that's our mission. But that's not our mission statement, but in my view, that's our mission. So the campaigns have allowed us to do that. Now, in this last campaign, we set as a goal, and we have strategic plans, but one of the goals was to improve the facilities. And we have, as you know, dramatically improved the facilities in the last 10 years or more. And that's made a difference that you can see. But we've also added significant major programs which have improved the offerings for our students. And we have continued the high quality education while growing the student body and keeping the academic level up. The one thing that we haven't done that we're still striving to do is to make the gains in terms of the rank of faculty compensation, and we're still striving to do that as we pursue improving the college in every aspect. But I've seen that over a progression that is before, during, and after capital campaigns. Capital campaigns are important, but they're not the only thing. And you've got to have focus on the future, and a discipline focused on the future. And I've seen over my 3 terms now on the board, 1 short term and 2 long terms, I've seen increased focus on the future by the trustees. Of course, you have to worry about what's happening tomorrow and the next week and the next month and the next year, but you really need to be looking years and years out. And that's why we have good leadership, and we've had increasingly good leadership. And right now we have a wonderful president with a skilled, disciplined, dedicated, hardworking cabinet. And we've just got a great team of people leading the college, supported by a very supportive and involved board of trustees.
Great. Very good. Well, speaking of the president, you were on the board of trustees when President Lindgren came on board. You may have served on the board when President Martin came on board. I don't know if you were, but
That's true.
I didn't know if you wanted to reflect on that time of presidential change.
I was on the board when Rusty Martin came in. I was on the board when Bob Lindgren came in. I was not on the board when Liddell first came in. But presidential change is a time for optimism, because you get new leadership that gives you a chance to look at, can we do things differently, or how should we do things differently? And I think each president has done that, and I'm pleased that Rusty Martin has come back to see the good work that has been, and that Liddell has come back to see the good work that their successors have done. And someday, when Bob retires after 54 years or so of service, I hope that his successor will be as pleased with his work as Bob has been with the work of his predecessors. Presidential change is good, and I suppose it can be bad if you have a bad choice. We haven't had any bad choices, and we've had successive good choices, and we're benefiting from that. And I will say this too, that President Lindgren is very good about seeing that those who have served in the past, both in the administrative and trustee roles, are honored for their service and kept advised of what's going on. And that's a wonderful idea, wonderful way to look at things, and he does that well. And I think also he does well making sure that people know that it is a team that keeps this place working, and that every member of the team is appreciated. I know I've seen him give countless recognitions to people at all sorts of levels, and he's very good at that. And I'm very pleased that he continues to do that and continues to serve.
Yes, I agree. Well, is there any, well, you were such a great storyteller, as we heard some last night, and we've heard today right here on the record. I didn't know if there was any meaningful anecdote or story that you know, just sort of captures your experience at one level that you would like to share.
Well, I was asked that recently by, I guess, by Anne Marie for publication in the Alumni magazine, and I thought of a story that really, first of all, it's impossible to take one story that encapsulates my experience, and I probably did a terrible job, as I will do now, but this is not. The one I'm about to mention is not a great story. There's no punchline, but it's just something that I remember distinctly. My first day here, I was in Thomas Branch dorm. I knew nobody here except for one person who had also been in my high school and who lived in Bennett. Now, Bennett and Thomas Branch are at opposite ends of this small campus. But nevertheless, I decided that first day, knowing no one except that one person, that I would go visit him in his dorm. And so I proceeded to walk the full length of the campus, which is not that long, but it's all the campus we had. And it occurred to me as I was walking that everybody that I passed acknowledged me in a friendly way, and just hi or nod or something that indicated that that I was part of their community. And I recognized, even as a naive freshman, how important that was, that this community had that type of spirit. And for me, that encapsulates what I'll call the Yellow Jacket spirit or the Randolph-Macon spirit. It was present within the first 24 hours I was here. Now, there are lots of stories that I could tell that I'm not going to. You've asked me for one. I'll tell you one that I shared with Anne Marie that I guess it's a little funny. I told you that I started off in Thomas Branch dorm. Later that year, I moved to Bennett also to move into a room with a fellow who became my roommate for all 4 years, Joe Hester Ingram. So Joe and I lived in Bennett, and we lived across the hall from Doug Crookshanks and Dennis Veely. And so for the rest of the year in Bennett and for all of the next year in, I think, Garland, Joe and I lived together. Dennis and Doug lived together immediately across the hall. And it might be said that we were not academic all-stars during our first 2 years. It might be said that. Some may have done better than others. Let's not go into those details. But at the end of our second year, we split up in that Joe and I went to live in the A.E. Pi fraternity house, and Doug and Dennis went to live in Mary Branch because they were waiting for a spot to open for them, which eventually did in the Phi Delta fraternity house. And after the first grading period of the first grading period after we were separated, now we're talking about our junior year, I was walking by Mary Branch, and I think it was Dennis who leaned out of the window and shouted at me that he and Doug had both gotten on the honor roll, so they had determined it was me who was the cause of their academic insufficiency. They weren't insufficient, but their academic weakness the first 2 years. And I was able to shout back that both Joe and I had also made the honor roll that first grading period, and so the jury's still out on who was to blame for whose grades. But that's a sort of, that's not a hilarious story, but maybe I shot all my good stuff last night. But we had a lot of good moments at the college with a lot of good friends, and just you couldn't have a better place to grow up and to learn at the same time. And sometimes the growing up was you were concentrating more on that than you were on the education. But the education was impressed on us, and I cannot stress enough how well prepared I was for whatever I was to face, but certainly for law school by what I learned here. And I can tell you that the grilling that I got when I presented my senior project was as demanding as anything I ever had at law school, because the faculty demanded of us that we do well. And I'm so grateful for it. And so I've got the benefit of great friends and the benefit of a great education and a wonderful experience. How can I not be involved with Randolph-Macon?
Well, thank you so much for taking the time on a busy weekend and as you're winding down your service on the board. But as you say, I know you'll continue to be involved for the college. Yeah.
And you're kind enough to agree to listen to me talk in an open-ended nature, because I could go on for hours and hours.
Well, any final thoughts or reflections?
Thank you for doing this. I think it'll be a wonderful resource, especially if you get some better interviewers.
Oh,
I meant to say better people to interview, not better interviewers, better interviewees.
Well, thank you. Well, we have, it's been wonderful to interview people from all across the college, from staff, alumni, faculty, administrators, and, all offices and trustees. And so I'm really happy to have the perspective from, and so many of those roles overlap in someone like you who's had a lot of different roles, and that's wonderful to get that perspective.
I'm glad. I wanted to, one of the things that I really enjoy, and so I want to tell you about this, is my wife and I really enjoy when we can have accepted students who haven't yet committed to Randolph-Macon come to our home so that we can talk to them about Randolph-Macon. And we're so grateful that we get the opportunity to spread the gospel according to Randolph-Macon to as many people as possible. And I was thinking back of the various things in my career here. As you may know from those you've interviewed of my era, that's era, back in the late 60s, the freshmen wore beanies. They look like yarmulkes with a bill on it. They're black and and lemon. And when I was here, you had to wear it the whole first year unless we beat Hampton-Sydney. We beat Hampton-Sydney, so we only had to wear it for a couple months. But I saved mine. And when we last had an accepted student function at my house, I was able to pull out my beanie and put it on top of a carved white wood swan that we have as a piece of furniture in our house. And I was able to put it there, and I enjoyed that very much. And a lot of my classmates who've seen that picture lament the fact that they didn't save their beanie. At the time, it wasn't something to be so much cherished, but it is now. That I can't think of much more I can tell you, and I appreciate your staying here on a beautiful Saturday afternoon when you could probably think of some other things to do.
Well, thank you so much, and I'm glad you didn't scare away the prospective students with a threat of wearing a beanie. So
We explained to them that was a long since gone relic of the past.
Good. Well, Alan Rashkind, thank you so much for your service to the college and for sharing your memories with Macon Memories.
Glad to do it. Thank you for doing
Thank
this.
you.
Okay?
Thank you.